Welcome back to Citizen One, Exploring Our Urban Future, an Urban Next original podcast series. I recently flew back to Barcelona a week earlier than I planned, landing just in time for the Smart City Expo World Congress, the annual migration point for urbanists, technologists, civic reformers, and anyone who believes that cities are still humanity's greatest invention. Walking into the Fira Barcelona Convention Center, it was a warm and rainy late autumn day, and I could already feel the city humming with that particular expo energy. Delegations weaving through long glass facades, flashing their lanyards, more than a dozen languages drifting up into the steel canopy channels, funneling crowds toward the main entrance. I'd come back to join some colleagues who were showcasing some new tools they've been developing. And the buzz around this year's program is hard to ignore. Next-generation digital twins capable of modeling entire metro regions in real time. AI-driven mobility engines using federated learning instead of centralized surveillance. Adaptive power systems built on edge microgrids, and blue economy and climate-responsive materials emerging from R&D labs in the Gulf and Korea. And then a wave of lightweight civic data platforms finally designed with small and medium-sized municipalities in mind. But what struck me most wasn't the hardware or the software. It was the geography. The floor was alive with new exhibitors from the global south: Kenya, Senegal, Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, India, the Philippines, Indonesia, Uruguay, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. These weren't the usual pilot project booths. These were sovereign visions, prototypes of a future not being imported but authored locally, rooted in cultural, economic, and ecological realities that rarely appear on Western dashboards. The conversations felt different too, less about optimization, more about dignity, less about efficiency, more about agency, less about prediction, and more about participation. It was an energizing reminder that the future of cities is no longer being imagined in a single hemisphere. And yet, beneath the excitement lingered a familiar tension, one that becomes harder to ignore the deeper you go into the world of urban innovation. Moore's Law loomed over the entire conference, not in the literal transistor sense, but in its cultural consequence. The expectation that urban systems must scale, accelerate, and self-optimize at the same exponential pace as computation itself. This mindset has quietly reshaped the smart city agenda, pushing municipalities towards solutions engineered for speed rather than stewardship, and efficiency rather than equity. The industry now behaves as if cities should evolve with a cadence of microchips, forgetting that the civic realm moves according to a different physics: cultural, social, historical, and human. The term smart city has become an unquestioned virtue in contemporary planning discourse, a shorthand for sustainability, livability, innovation, and progress. But underneath the polished renderings and keynote speeches lies a contradiction rarely interrogated. The Smart City Industrial Complex, a global apparatus of consultants, tech platforms, sovereign wealth funds, and starchitects who promise liberation through logistics while entrenching new forms of control. As Noam Chomsky once observed in a different context, moral integrity begins with applying to oneself the same scrutiny demanded of others. In his critique of U.S. foreign policy, he argued that selective self-examination often becomes an operational principle of empire. A similar pattern now shapes how urban innovation is promoted, exported, and justified by what I call the smart city industrial complex. That's precisely where smart city movements falter, not at the level of technology, but of ethical coherence. This techno-colonialism is too often structural. It builds upon a Western tradition of exporting ideals while exempting itself from the consequences. Urban innovation is too often framed as a one-way flow of intelligence. From the global north to the global south, from consultants to communities, from software to street life. The blind spots are rarely explicit, but they become embedded in the language of solutions, optimization, and best practices that assume a universal model of progress. often blind to local context. In cities from Nairobi to Phnom Penh, Western platforms and Chinese infrastructure vendors often write the operating system before citizens ever see a schematic, a master plan, or a data model for civic governance. In parallel, China's Belt and Road urbanization push often exports infrastructural systems with governance assumptions embedded, more command than consensus. The result is a dependency model masked as development, technological sovereignty exchanged for borrowed legitimacy. The result can be a dangerous sleight of hand. Cities that preach inclusion while being designed by elite technocrats. Cities that invoke resilience while relying on fragile, extractive global supply chains and just-in-time logistics. Cities that claim human-centered design while reducing the human to an archetype, a user profile, a data node, a persona, or lifestyle cluster. This isn't just a gap in execution, it's a crisis of credibility, and it's worsened by the refusal to confront moral equivalence. When they deploy surveillance, it's repression. When we, the West, do it, it's considered efficiency. When a Gulf state builds a monumental city, it's authoritarian vanity. When Silicon Valley or New York does the same, it's considered disruption. This double standard is not just rhetorical, it's institutional, embedded in how funding flows, partnerships form, and narratives get laundered through design media and TED Talk stages. Chomsky's warning that refusing to hold oneself to the same ethical standards applied to one's adversaries or competitors is the very definition of hypocrisy, and that lands squarely here. The smart city industrial complex is not neutral. It carries the legacy of soft imperialism in digital form, dressing up extractive models in sleek UX and ESG compliance. The more its language expands, the more its substance contracts. This is the contradiction economy of modern urbanism. After 30 years embedded in global mega projects, it's clear to me that the risk register for smart cities is not technological. It's epistemological. It's moral. The real risk lies in who gets to ask the questions and who is conveniently left out of the answers. Cities are being built based on what developers believe citizens should want, rather than engaging citizens to learn what they already know about their local communities. The clean slate of greenfield smart cities, in particular, is often celebrated as an opportunity for innovation. But such blank canvases too often conceal the erasure of memory, geography, and politics. The smart city industrial complex doesn't just build infrastructure, it builds urban amnesia, flattening difference into dashboards and recasting inequality as a software glitch. What arrives first is the apparatus, the spreadsheet, the Gantt chart, the BIM models, the procurement workflows masquerading as transformation. The stack of policies beneath the marketing campaign, the invisible scaffolding of power games embedded in governance structures. Whether smart city projects are solely speculative labs for future systems or a tangible metropolis in the making remains unresolved. That ambiguity is part of the design and the danger. A city perpetually in beta, shielded by vision but steered by protocol, where those who cannot be made legible to the model are quietly left outside of it. The smart city industrial complex thrives on performance, of competence, of sustainability, of inevitability. But behind closed doors, the truth circulates freely. Those building any of the 100-plus smart cities in progress around the globe know that the gap between story and system is not closing, it's widening. Participation is too often reverse engineered to validate a pre-approved plan. Feedback loops can be performative. Equity can appear in pitch decks, but not in policy. Still, the renderings get shinier, the language more aspirational, and the machine keeps moving. Consultants must bill, visions must be funded. This is not moral equivalency. This is moral obfuscation. The most dangerous question in a smart city project is often the simplest one. Who holds the power? Raise that question from inside the machine, and the reminders arrive quickly of NDAs, of replaceability, of narrative discipline. In an urban landscape increasingly shaped by surveillance capitalism, dissent gets recast as disloyalty. But loyalty to a flawed system is not a virtue, it's complicity. Most urban corporate technocrats don't enter the field to deceive or dominate, but the smart city industrial complex incentivizes compliance, not critique, training even well meaning planners and architects to prioritize investor optics over public trust. Systemic complicity doesn't begin with intent, it begins with incentives. Urban futures cannot be taken seriously unless the illusion of neutrality and innovation is dismantled. Sensors and predictive models do not exist outside history. Urban design cannot engineer its way past the wounds of empire, inequality, or ecological collapse. And a city that automates without accountability is not smart. It's a simulation of governance. A city that reduces its citizens to use cases is not resilient, it's brittle. A city that treats inclusion as a postscript is not progressive, it's already obsolete. The failures of top-down smart city models are not confined to any single form of government. Democracies have their own blind spots. Toronto's sidewalk labs collapsed not in spite of its democratic context, but because of it. A public increasingly attuned to surveillance and privatization rejected Google's city within a city not on ideological grounds, but because no one had asked them if they wanted it. In Texas, Elon Musk's experimental city-building project, Snailbrook, reveals how private capital seeks to bypass civic process entirely, proposing a libertarian company town under the pretense of affordable housing. Telosa, pitched as a $400 billion utopia of equitable capitalism, has captured headlines but remains vaporware, conceptually generous, procedurally hollow. These are not authoritarian failures, these are democratic ones. In India, the smart cities mission has yielded countless physical upgrades but limited civic voice. Amaravati, once imagined as India's most futuristic capital, was derailed by political shifts in a top-down development model that alienated landowners and urbanists alike. These failures expose a shared weakness, the inability or unwillingness to build with citizens rather than around them. Yet there are signs of progress in unlikely places. Oman, often overlooked in the regional urban discourse, has begun experimenting with localized, citizen-driven planning frameworks, especially in Muscat and Duqm. These initiatives are still nascent, but they suggest an awareness that civitas must be co-authored, that trust cannot be subcontracted. Digital twins are not enough. Civic mirrors are needed. Governance frameworks must be participatory. Equity must be embedded in procurement. Representation must be embedded in decision-making. And urban memory must be honored. And power must be accountable. Medellin's transformation through localized interventions, cable cars, participatory budgeting, and community-integrated urban design stands as a counterpoint to the detached spectacle of the smart city industrial complex. Likewise, Vienna's commitment to social housing and Barcelona's embrace of citizen co-design show what's possible when the public is treated as a partner, not a market segment. These are cities that remember who they serve. Even in Europe, where social democratic governance prevails, many smart city pilots funded under Horizon Europe or the European Innovation Partnership have fallen into the same trap, privileging dashboards over dialogue. If the smart city industrial complex is to evolve, it must learn how to examine itself, not just how to be externally critiqued. A post-industrial urbanism would center distributed agency, community data trusts, urban tech co-ops, and civic-led planning protocols, not just user-centered cities, but citizen-shaped systems, where the code base of urban governance is legible, negotiable, and collectively authored. This won't emerge from within the smart city industrial complex, but it will come from those willing to challenge it, those who refuse silence, reject spectacle, and demand a seat at the table. The next city won't be decided by engineers or render farms. It will be shaped by those who refuse to be erased from its blueprint. Welcome to the reckoning, Citizen One. Thanks for joining Citizen One, exploring our urban future and Urban Next original podcast series. I'm your host, Douglas Stewart McDaniel. My first novel, Ghost Emperor, is now available. You can pick it up at citizen1.world. There are links to the Kindle version, the paperback, and the audiobook is coming soon as I finish narrating it, which is another adventure entirely. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you again soon.